Final Fantasy VII Remake. Final Fantasy VII Remake Podcast. Podcast. Remake. 7. Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy VII Remake Podcast. A 4-part podcast miniseries where your hosts Jonah and Trent talk about the highs and lows of FF7 Remake. Hello, welcome. This is a podcast. I'm here with my friend Trent.
Hello.
Yay, howdy. I'm Jonah. This is like an untitled podcast thing that we're going to be doing. We're going to be talking about the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which we've talked a little tiny bit about, but we've been saving a bunch of our thoughts and feels about it so that we could have it on this recording thingy in your ears. Oh, yeah. So, Trent, talk about a little bit about the game, I guess, with your... Gosh, how should we start? We should probably say, what's your experience with Final Fantasy in general before playing this thing?
I've grown up playing a lot of the Final Fantasy games. Let's see. I had access to it was before my time, but I had access to the Super Nintendo.
Oh yeah.
So the first Final Fantasy game I've played was 6, though when it was released in the States, it was titled 3.
Yeah. It's about the same for me.
Yeah. So that was my first experience, and from then on, I've kind of played it in somewhat order.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny, Final Fantasy VII was when I really got into it, and
Mm-hmm.
Final Fantasy VII is what when I was much younger, obviously. Is what prompted me to ask Santa for a PlayStation, because it was being demoed at a store, and I saw that and I thought it was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing how your perspective on graphics can change as you're introduced to newer and better tech.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah. If there's one thing that did not age well with Final Fantasy VII, it was the polygons.
Oh yeah. I mean, man, that's such an interesting thing. I remember myself saying, telling somebody else about the original game and saying, I think this is the first game that really shows something that is sometimes better than real life. And and I'm comparing it to if you look at a picture of the ground, like some concrete, right? Mm-hmm. The Final Fantasy VII was more compelling than concrete, but which sounds crappy, but hey, that concrete's got all sorts of definition and pixels and whatnot. I don't know, real life concrete. We've come a long way since then, and the remake really has improved on that aspect for sure.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's the character models that didn't age well. The backgrounds are still great looking.
Oh yeah.
Since they use a lot of pre-rendered stuff.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot like Myst in that way, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you've played most of the games in relative order. I've done basically the same. I went back and played some of the earlier ones on Retro. I think we did that a little while back. We tried to play through Final Fantasy V, I thought, right?
Yeah. Oh, you're talking about with the Stoic Club?
Yeah, with the Stoic Club.
Yeah. Long RPGs, I don't think are good for the format.
No,
unfortunately.
No, I don't. Yeah, for sure. Well, okay, all right. So we've got some experience with the games, right? We have Final Fantasy VII has this neat little place in our heart that will never die, or at least we hope. Time may tell, considering.
It's not wrong.
Yeah. All right, so this is a good place for the spoiler warning, I think. So, as we're going to get into this, we're going to talk about everything. There's going to be nothing is sacred. Everything about Final Fantasy VII Remake will be talked about. Not everything, but all the biggest parts, all the biggest reveals. And so, if you are worried about that, listener, don't listen to this podcast. That's right. Don't listen to this podcast. And maybe come back later. Okay. Yeah. So, yes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, don't. In order to actually really talk about what makes this game, what redeems the game for me, you'd have to dig into spoilers. There's no avoiding that.
Oh yeah, especially considering the way that the story is structured. That basically a lot of the a lot of your feelings about the game are going to change as you play the game and finally get to the last chapter, which okay.
The longest chapter in the game, I'd argue.
Oh yeah, I mean it feels really long. It feels like the last two chapters are basically the same chapter. And yeah, like I'm not even really. I understand why. Well, look, we're getting a little too deep into this. I think we should.
Yeah, that's fair. All right. So overall impressions.
Yeah. Overall impressions. So how do you feel about the game?
I overall, having played through it start to finish, having kind of like sat with that for like a week, I can say that I don't regret the time I sat with it, and I clocked in like 40 hours, I want to say.
Yeah.
I don't regret the purchase. Overall I enjoyed the game. And I'm looking forward to what comes next. But despite me enjoying the game, there are some problems with it.
Yeah, I would agree that I have a very similar impression. Like, I kind of oscillated between, oh, hey, I remember this bit, or I remember this from the original game, and I don't remember this bit at all. It's my second mode. And the third one was like, what? And it was fun. It was fun overall, I thought. But, like, it's a weird artifact of AAA design, I think, right? That you have like 1,000 people or more all chugging away, and this is what they produced. And for good or bad, like this is, I think, a perfect flagship of the pros and cons of that kind of blockbuster style game.
Of that design approach.
Yeah. Where you have like it feels like there's certain people in the company that had a huge influence on the game, and then other people just kind of went with the flow, right? And it's like there might have been some people in the Square Enix thing that might have protested on some parts, but they didn't get a voice because that's not the way that works.
Oh yeah. There's definitely parts in the game where they phoned it in.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, but overall, I liked it. I think it was at least a 7 out of 10, if not an 8, if we're going to use the number system. But like, it's positive. It's good, but it's just weird. So it's a big reason why I want to talk about it. Okay, we liked it. So let's go into story.
All right, I think the biggest thing, if we're going to discuss the story, is that in order to get the most out of the story. You had to have either played the original or have gained like a thorough knowledge of it via osmosis or some other means.
Oh, I completely agree. I think there's some parts of the story that don't even make sense unless you played the original game. And in fact, like we're going to get to the ending, and I think that's the most true for the ending of the game.
I want to say the game assumes you've played the original. Just by the structure.
Yeah, and I would say that it's actually required. Like you have to at least watch a synopsis of the original game.
Yes, I would argue that as well. Otherwise, things are going to fall flat.
Yeah, for sure. Which is interesting, right? Because they didn't really remake Final Fantasy VII with this game, which is the most bizarre part of it all, right?
Here's the thing. I would argue they did remake it.
Okay.
What they did not do is remaster it.
Oh yeah, that's a great distinction, and this is the reason why we're talking today.
Yep.
Yeah, no, that's a great distinction. I heard recently in this week, since I've played it as well, that that it's actually someone thought that the name Final Fantasy VII Remake was a little too tongue in cheek, but like when you think of it, it's actually Final Fantasy VII Remake. That becomes the theme of the game. It makes more sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a remake in terms of the in terms of how like we take old media and remake it into do a reboot or a remake. But yeah, not only is it a remake of the game, it's a remake of the narrative. Yeah,
right. Yeah, they're like it's laying on top of that foundation. But we think we talked about that. I think we've got yeah. So here's some common themes. We're not going to talk about every single part of the story because I think that would be like an 18-hour podcast, right? We're literally playing in real time. Yeah. So like some common themes, and stop me if I'm missing anything here, but like
sure.
Is that for me, like in the story, like there was like something new and old in basically every chapter in the game. You just kind of went back and forth from like, oh, this is straight canon to this is the part that added in. And every time they came in with something that was new, you were like, oh yeah, this is completely different. right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah, on that subject, what I find really interesting is that, all right, the first thing you play, the first chapter,
Yeah.
since we're gonna kind of like we're not necessarily gonna tackle it chapter by chapter, but because there's 18 of those, and like you said, you don't want a 7-hour podcast. The first chapter, and I believe I didn't play the demo, but from what I understand, that the demo they released was just the first chapter, which is what's the word? It's almost a shot for shot retelling of the bombing mission, which kind of like hot starts the original game.
Right. It's the first chapter is more like the original game than probably any chapter in the game. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's why some people had some contention with the overall product, because of the impression they got from that demo and the first chapter.
Right.
Like after that first chapter, things start to veer off.
Yeah. There's slowly, like, there's some of the additions are really cool, and some of them are just not. But we're going to talk about chapter 17 when we get there.
Yeah, for sure. On the subject of chapter 1, the destruction of the Mako Reactor 1. One of the positive changes overall, I think, was the added characterization.
Oh yeah,
throughout the entire cast, namely the trio, the Avalanche trio of Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because like they didn't get much character time at all.
No, Jesse had like 3 lines of dialogue in the original.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yes.
Oh,
pretty
wow.
much.
Yeah, and then she's like, whoa, she's very different, but in probably a good way. I think that ultimately, like, Jesse's characterization in the remake is actually better.
Well, I mean, yes, she is better than the blank canvas that she was in the original.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, I also don't want to make it sound like that. Sounds like I said that she's great, but she's
right. she's an improvement. Which, depending on your impression of the original Jesse, may or may not be saying much.
Right. Yeah. It's like saying adding lime to Diet Coke doesn't make it not Diet Coke, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Or throwing a little cover on a white canvas, does that make it a painting?
Oh yeah, for sure. Right. I signed it. I signed it this time. Okay. All right. So real quick, I guess we're gonna get through these common themes, and we can really dig into the early part, because I think we're starting to get there. Is that characters are easily distracted. Like something important will be going on, and then suddenly the game will just sidetrack you into this other theme, like the scene. Like one spot in specific that I have to mention because it'll give you context. Is that like when you're going through the train graveyard. You're like basically racing to get to the pillar to prevent the destruction of the plate, but then suddenly we're just going to start talking about these dead ghosts, and nobody has any urgency anymore. And I'm like, oh, great.
Okay, all right. That is my biggest problem with the game.
Oh, really?
Yeah, my biggest problem with the game is its pacing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It and pacing with the narrative and pacing with the gameplay, but we're talking about the pacing with the narrative right now, because it seems to ignore at times its own stakes.
Right. Yeah. Like it doesn't feel lived in. Right.
No, not at all. Like you mentioned, like them not like showing the like the appropriate tension and focus of the task at hand, like with the ghosts and everything. Well, let's flip a little forward, where Aerith is tasked to get Marlene at the 7th heaven,
right?
While the plate is like, it's about to fall down,
right? And
she's taking her sweet time to slowly walk into the bar, slowly find Marlene, slowly coax her into like, oh, I'm here to help.
Yeah.
and it hangs there for what feels like a half hour. And I'm going, that plate would have fallen ages ago.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Just get a burlap sack, put Marlene in the sack, explain later.
Right. Yeah. I'd say like your continued survival is far more important than her feelings at this point in time.
Oh gosh, yeah. She's not going to have any more feelings in a moment here.
Right. It's like Aerith knew, like, I got time. It's not going to fall until I'm done with the scene.
Oh my gosh. Well, that kind of pushes on maybe Aerith is actually magic and knows the entire plot of the game, but that is something we're going to have to bookmark. Aerith is both good and bad in this game.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the agency of the characters is something I want to talk about. Like, so it's a common thread throughout most of the chapters that the Dementor spirits, off-brand Dementors, Whispers, kind of make the characters not have anything to do. The characters are like, oh, we're going to do things because we have motivations. And then the spirit things are coming out and being like, none of your intentions mattered. Like, you're just going to have to follow the plot. Follow this plot.
Yes. I both like and hate the Dementors.
Yeah.
I only like them because of the aforementioned meta-narrative.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'm not sure if you want to dig into that right now, but because early on they make their presence known and they show up to just kind of literally railroad you in certain directions.
Oh yeah, I mean, yes, okay, yeah. So like, I was super frustrated by them until I saw the ending, and then I was like, okay, well at least they have context.
Yes, at least they. Every time they showed up, I rolled my eyes so hard.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, the second time they showed up, I thought that was a literal dream sequence. Considering they totally forced, like, they show you Cloud going to sleep, and then suddenly it's morning and all this stuff is happening. I'm like, this can't be real.
Yeah, since we're on that, that's like, this is one of the earlier chapters after the bombing mission.
Yeah.
So yeah, they start attacking the slums. Well, not even attacking; they're like just running around and messing with the Avalanche members.
Yeah.
Namely Jessie.
Mm-hmm.
Which, you don't know why. Like, you didn't even get the impression that they were focusing Jessie until she made a point of saying, it felt like they're going after me.
Oh yeah, I completely forgot that. Jeez.
Yes, and and that kind of like leaves the back of your head after a while until you learn like why they were doing what they're doing.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
all right, the reason they targeted Jessie, and spoiler, is to maintain the original plot line of Cloud needs to go on this mission because he went on this mission in the original, yet Barrett does not want him on the mission.
Right.
So the Dementors attack Jessie, mess up her leg so that she's off the mission, and now Barrett has no choice.
Right, because like, yeah, like how did that happen in the original game? Like, did she just have a damaged leg after the first bombing, and then it was like, okay, well, natural fit, but now it's like it doesn't happen in the remake, but then the Dementors show up to push that into a thing. It's like every time something doesn't happen, they show up to make it happen. And it's like, if you just did it like the original game, you wouldn't need these guys at all, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Like every time they show up, it's because the cast isn't following the script of the original. Like if there's any deviation, they're there to fix it.
Yeah, which really speaks to that concept of that meta narrative of what the Dementors actually are in the game.
Yes. Spoiler warning.
Everything's a spoiler warning. This whole podcast is a spoiler warning. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. The Dementors, the Whispers, are almost like the embodiment of fate. They are the original. They are there to make sure the original game happens as intended.
Right. Yeah. Which we might as well talk about the ending sooner than later. But like, yeah.
It gives context to everything that's going to happen.
Yeah, okay. Let's just talk about the ending before we continue to anything else. Let's just jump ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, because we've talked about it so much. Okay, so oh my gosh, there's so much going on in the ending. It's hard to even parse what happened. So like, the Dementor. Okay, so you said that they are there to make sure they're like avatars of fate or whatever. That the planet is exerting its will to make sure that destiny happens the way it should. But like beyond that, in a fourth wall narrative, I think they're actually the expectations of the players of the remake that. They were trying to they had to fit this into the game. They feel like that the people at Square Enix were like, you know what? Let's make the people who are going to play the game actual characters in the game.
Right.
Right. And I'm like, oh, that is okay. So that is like, I titled this note here. If the shark jumps and never stops jumping, did it jump in the first place? It's pretty wild. So, what they're doing, I think, with the ending is that they're setting themselves up for like a narrative that is akin to like the Star Wars movies, the new ones that are basically just about Star Wars and not actually about their own plots, which I think is what happens in this game. But like, I think so we need to talk about what literally actually happens. So you go towards, so you get to the end of the game. The end of the game in the remake is the last sequence where you're on the motorcycle and you're going to the edge of Midgard to get out of town, right? Mm-hmm. And then, so from that point, you get there, you get to the end of town, and then you've reached the end of the game. And the game's like, yay, you made it to the end of the game. And then Sephiroth shows up, and it's all like, so you're at the end of the game, I noticed. And then cuts a hole in the space and time. And you're like, what? And then Aerith's like, hey, I can do that too. And you're like, what? And you're like, and then you go through the space hole and fight God, right?
All right. Well, she didn't. The hole was there the whole time. She just made it. She changed its colors.
Oh yeah.
She changed the color of the hole, and I guess kind of she drops like the warning, like if you go through here, it's unknown territory,
right?
And she states it like she doesn't know what's going to happen.
Right, we're going off script.
Going off script. Like she had a copy of the script of the original.
Yeah,
and she's saying like, I know what's going to happen if we don't go in there. I don't know what's going to happen if we do go in there. Yeah,
and so she's specifically the tension of the story, and it's actually a great moment, I think, is like, not changing the future could make the future worse, and so we need to actually think about what we're doing, right?
Yes. Yeah. So the question is, what was their reasoning for going in there? What was it, just to break away? Were they just as annoyed with the ghost as everyone else?
I mean, yeah, I kind of get. I guess so, right? Like, I kind of get the feeling that it's unclear to how much the other characters than Aerith are like on board with it, other than that Aerith's on board with it, so we're all on board with it, right?
Well, yeah. Well, like Cloud, Tifa, and Barrett, they didn't get the they weren't faxed the script like Red 13 was.
Yeah. Right. Like, of course, Red 13 seems to know more about the game than most of the characters anyway. Yeah.
Well, he came in contact with Aerith, and he just suddenly knows what the whispers are, and to the credit of the narrative, and under caps with credit. He's aware of this, but he doesn't 100% understand the context. Like, I know these things, but I don't really know why I know these things.
Oh yeah, right. Like the red is kind of a weird in between for like the ancients and other species of the planet anyway, right? Which is kind of like been there, but it's really pulled out.
Yes.
Yeah. So. Okay, so alright, so people, they're just kind of like, Sephiroth goes to the thing, they're like, we gotta go fight the bad things, these ghosts have been messing with us, they've been messing with us far more than helping us, they do in fact actually help the team occasionally, which is weird, and so, okay, we're gonna go through, and we're gonna fight all these things, apparently, and so then you go through, and then you see a gigantic super ghost, and then you're like, okay, we gotta kill Super Ghost, the embodiment of all time and space? The literal god of fate?
Yeah. You have to climb the hallway, the long hallway, to meet up to the ghost, but not really meet up with the ghost. You meet up with the whisper incarnations of your party.
Right, yeah. And is that really what's going on? Because I didn't really dig too much into the names of those different things, but...
Oh, well, think about it. Like, one had a sword, one used their fists, and one had guns.
Oh, sure, of course. It's basically Cloud, Tifa, and Barrett, right? Okay.
Correct.
Oh, yeah, well, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, and like Aerith didn't have one.
Right. Well, neither did Red X then, right? Or
Yeah.
Red 13. Nor did Kate Sith, nor Vincent, nor Yuffie. Which I guess we could talk about all four of those characters in a sec, like some point later. But all right, so you fight the ghost things, you fight these mini bosses, and then you just keep fighting them over and over again. This boss has like 11 forms.
Yeah, that was not. I was so done at that point.
Well,
I wanted it to be over.
Yeah, I mean, basically in the last 5 hours of gameplay, you will fight a total of 83 million bosses. It's like all of the bosses in the game are right at the end of the game.
All right, so like what was an engaging final encounter in that chapter? Sephiroth. I would say that was an interesting fight.
Oh, yeah.
As your party is slowly added on and he kind of changes his behaviors. That was interesting. What wasn't interesting was the hallway to the to Mega Whisper, and you're having to, I guess, like defeat the Whisperers one at a time to stagger that guy, which piles on damage to him. Then you have to repeat the same fight again and again until you do enough damage.
Yeah.
To the Mega Whisper, and then he finally goes down.
Yeah.
So yes, as far as like final bosses go, that fight was really not engaging.
Yeah, I kind of wish that like they could have done it a little bit differently too, because like you end up fighting at least 7 of those mini ghost guys, right? They could have actually had each one of them represent like Cloud, Barrett, Yuffie, all the characters, right?
Right.
And then they could have had you fight like all the Vincent and Yuffie and Skate Sith first, and you defeat them, and then eventually you work your way up to the big bads, right?
They could have, they could have done a lot for it instead of making it a cutscene with extra steps.
Yes, I agreed. Yeah, for sure. I thankfully took a big break right before fighting Rufus, and so like I wasn't probably as burned out on that thing as you were, but
all right. I'll preface it like I played chapter 17 and 18 in succession. I marathoned that whole segment, so by the time I reached the Whisper segment, I was done.
Oh, I completely understand, considering that chapter 17 is like it's the size of 3 chapters for no reason.
We can as we get into like the mechanical aspects of the game, and the gameplay, we can talk about how the game does not respect your time. Yeah. But for now, the final chapter, you suffice to say, you're able to overcome the Whispers. The Grand Whisper dies, and these arbiters of fate and destiny are just completely taken out of the game and the narrative. They're gone, destroyed, and when the game ends. It says like the unknown journey will continue, and emphasis on unknown, because now no one knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, no, I totally, I dig that. I like that. Like we can go off script now. We're gonna have to there's a little pin in that though for the very end of the podcast, unfortunately, because I've been reading about what the directors have been saying about the remake and their intentions for future games, and I'm not excited, but.
Well, Nomura is Nomura, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately. Okay, so real quick, I think we skipped a little bit here. So after you fight the ghost, you fight Sephiroth, right? The Sephiroth fight is really neat. It's like fine. It's largely not. I'd say it's more thematically cool than it is mechanically cool, right? If that makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Because overall, Sephiroth, I think as a boss was actually kind of easy.
Yes. He was.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, he was not particularly hard. I don't think I've ever wiped on any given boss.
Okay, yeah, no, I wiped on some bosses. I wiped on Rufus 4 times.
Oof. All right, Rufus is. All right, we'll get into the boss. I guess we can put a segment into as far as like boss fights are concerned and how they rate.
Yeah, for sure. Agreed. Let's just move ahead. I want to get the rest of this out. This is like, okay, so you fight Sephiroth, right? So you have a cool scene where Sephiroth is like, "Hey, here we are at the edge of the universe. This is literally like the very final bit of everything, like end of Final Fantasy, right? And then he's like, 7 seconds to the end of everything, what will you do with it? And I'm like, that's cool. All right, so he's like, it's kind of weird because I think Sephiroth's motivations are kind of like, hey, I'm egging Cloud on to become stronger because I realize that I can't do anything outside. Like, okay, Aerith says, like, okay, the whispers and the will of fate just kind of glide off of him like he's a duck, right? Like the water,
yes. Yeah, he's like able to influence them to a degree, but they're still there. They're still interfering with what he can do.
Yeah, to some extent, right? But ultimately, like, she frames it in such a way that he can cut through those things like nobody else can. That, like, they have almost no effect on him.
Right. But the thing is, like, the ghost can still affect what he affect things he does touch.
Yeah, right.
So they can undermine him.
Yeah, like a little bit, like anything. If he affects something else in the world, the ghost can affect that thing and not Sephiroth, right? And so they're kind of trying to do what they can to mess with that because they want to. That's like the biggest primary danger to their whole shenanigans, right? Is that they can't function with this thing that doesn't even seem to care about them. Doing its own thing. And so he's going through, and it seems like his motivation is to push Cloud to a position to inadvertently help Sephiroth potentially survive the events of Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, because Sephiroth does give the impression that, like Aerith, he's kind of aware of the script.
Yeah, right. And like as you're fighting this giant super ghost, right, you see little remastered cutscenes from the original game. You see all this stuff. Like you see big moments like Aeris' death. You see Aeris' death actually in the second chapter of the game. You see it actually. Yeah. It's actually foreshadowed. All of this is foreshadowed in the second chapter, but if you blink, you miss it, and you probably won't understand it when you see it in the first place anyway.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's why we caution you need foreknowledge of the original.
Absolutely.
Get the most out of this. So yes, I do agree with that. That he's kind of coaxing Cloud to get rid of this whole fate nonsense so that he may have a shot to do what he wants to do.
Yeah, for sure. Right. And so, like, that's neat.
It is.
I really wish that Sephiroth hadn't been in the game so much, but I mean, if we're gonna have him as a final boss, we have to, right?
Well, he was built up super well in the original, and but that was because it's the original. Sephiroth suffers from his own notoriety, his own fame.
Right.
Because people, they know who Sephiroth is. They just by osmosis, they're aware of what he is, where he's from, what's his deal.
Right.
So they could have attempted to hold things back with the narrative if they wanted to, but that's if they were wanting to do a remaster shot for shot remake, which they did not want to do. Right. So as soon as you start the game and you have like full control of Cloud, they rub that long-haired man in your face as often as they can get away with.
Right, because like as much as they want to put him in the game, right? They committed to a scope of the game which does not include Sephiroth, basically.
Correct.
Yeah, and so like if he shows up like at the last possible moment in Midgard, and I really like the way that played out in the original, and I'm really disappointed by the way that it played out in this one, but
for sure.
At least it went somewhere, I guess.
Yeah, it did. If we're talking about this game versus the 5-6 hour segment that was the original, Sephiroth's inclusion in the original was better executed, but they had completely different intentions for this go.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. All right. So I think let's circle back a little bit to the beginning. We're not going to give an entire synopsis of the story, like we said, but like let's talk a bit about the early sections. It's like basically anything before Wall Market.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we mentioned that with like Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge get a lot more characterization. That's great.
Yes.
I thought something that was just really stood out to me about the game after finishing was, why does Stamp exist?
From what I was led to, I'm not sure. All right. As far as like my experience with Final Fantasy and Final Fantasy VII in particular, I have not played Crisis Core.
Oh yeah, me neither.
I have no knowledge of what took place there or what extra Frankenstein bits they cobbled on to the original narrative after the fact. So I don't know if Stamp existed after the fact. You're referring to Stamp as the like the Shinra propaganda dog?
Yeah, like the kind of cartoony, goofus and gallant sort of character, but it's like, for whatever reason, Barrett is like, hey, Stamp, and there's constantly using this as a weird through line.
Oh, you're talking about like in the later segments where like through the sewers or the underground areas, they're using him as a way to point paths.
Yeah, like throughout the entire game, really, it's like in early sections, you're like you see the graffiti. Barrett's like, look at the graffiti. It's our secret code to go the right direction in these tunnels. And then even earlier than that, Barrett is like it refers to Cloud as Stamp as being Shinra's dog, right?
Yeah. All right. Well, from what I understand, Stamp, and I could be off base. I'm just kind of going off of what I've heard about Crisis Core and what I've seen in this game. He was he was Shinra propaganda, namely used in the war against Wutai. And that's another change.
Oh right, yeah.
We should bring up is like Wutai wasn't mentioned at all in the original beyond it being like an Asian analog in the world and Yuffie being from there, but evidently Shinra and Wutai were at war with one another, and they had been at war for a good time, and that's where like the soldiers of Shinra were primarily used. And that's where Sephiroth became like a hero of that war.
Right. I think I remember bits of the original game talking about that, but more like once you start getting into the Wutai in the game. Right. Like because you get little bits and pieces of it. Like there's the mountain battle thing where you have to, like the mini game where you have to fight against the troops, and they kind of talk about that a bit. Right. And I know that they talked about that during the Nibelheim bits, right, where like they mention, I don't know, they're going after the reactor or whatever, but I don't know. There's like they allude to it at least.
Yeah. They really dump in the whole Wutai engagement more so here. They pull that out real early. So that's what Stamp was. He was Shinra propaganda, little cute cartoon animal to, I guess, lift spirits, like fight the good fight. We're the ones on the right.
Oh, that makes more sense. And you mentioning that it's from Crisis Core makes a lot more sense too, because like I haven't played Crisis Core. I haven't played before Crisis. I haven't even played any of the spin-off games. So sure. Yeah, okay. So sure, it's a reference to that. Cool. It felt really out of place not knowing any of those games.
Yeah, I mean when I came into it, it's Stamp and blah blah blah, Shinra propaganda.
Right.
Like, oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, cool. All right. Yeah. Well, okay. So what are some things we like out of the first few chapters of the game?
The first few, narratively. Well, we already talked about like the extra characterization that is afforded by just them taking what was a 6-hour segment of the original and stretching it out considerably.
So like 18 hours. Yeah. Like, I mean, so they give Jessie basically her own chapter, and that's kind of neat. Yeah.
Yes. Out of the trio, Jessie got the most time devoted to her.
Yeah, and then Biggs got cats.
Wedge. Wedge is
I can't tell them apart.
Well, it helps that like Big isn't big.
Oh, sure, yeah. Okay, sure. Okay, so yeah, Wedge got a bunch of cats. Yeah, so I mean that's all right. Whatever, they all have something at least, right?
They all have something at least. Fucking poor. All right. I wasn't 100% sure because of the execution, just how it was shot. It made it seem, and it had so little screen time devoted to it. And we're jumping ahead again since we're on the subject of Wedge.
Oh man, let's just talk about those three characters throughout the game, and we'll be done.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, that seems appropriate. Yeah, sure. As far as the early bits, they do hint at the I can't remember from the original. All right, do you remember the guys with like the numbers emblazoned on them?
Oh yeah, sure. The Geneva test subjects, right?
Yeah. They just threw that in there real early.
Oh yeah, as early as possible, basically.
Yeah. Like, oh, he's just this moaning guy in the other room. Don't worry about him.
Yeah, right, for sure. Which I mean, I don't like it that early, but I do appreciate that they're in the first section of the game because they had to.
Yeah, that they're kind of hinting at it. But yeah, they didn't altogether. They didn't really go into the whole test subjects though. They didn't refer to them as test subjects.
Yeah, that's really weird, right? Because like that's actually a really important part of what happens in the game too. The whole point of like at the end of the game, you see like the same guy who was in the room next to Clouds, be the guy who you ended up fighting at the end of the game, right? Where like in the original game, go ahead.
They like gave no context for that.
Yeah, right.
As if they expected you played the original and like know them off of sight. Like, oh, that's who that is. That's what it is.
Right. Yeah. So like in the original game, right? For context, like they end up. So each of those guys end up being like they're infused with Geneva's cells, and then so Hojo has this whole reunion. Not by paradox. It's a hypothesis, right? That's saying, oh, Geneva's cells want to get back together, and so all these people eventually end up congregating on Sephiroth, who ends up stealing Geneva's body, basically. And so each one of these guys ends up being a piece of Geneva that you fight throughout the original game, right? And so like, yeah, and so having them show up in the remake, it makes sense considering that they want to have a Geneva fight in the in Shinra HQ, which wasn't there before. It's a good fight, but whatever. It's they don't even that whole thing makes no sense. I think other than they're spooky, and occasionally you see flashbacks with them and Sephiroth around, but like it helps to actually tell the player, I think, at some point, hey, these are test subjects.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, give some context, even if you haven't, even if you have played the original, some added context, at least for like the characters or something. But no, nothing.
Yeah, which is kind of emblematic of the rest of the game, where like a lot of the things don't make sense because they never bother to even show you why they make sense.
No, they gloss them over.
Yeah,
because they make a lot of assumptions.
Yeah. Okay. So Jessie, Biggs, and Wedge, right? So Jessie, Jessie's cool. She gets the most. She is a little. I'm not a huge fan of her being a super flirt. Like that seems weird to me.
Yeah. Like, all right. You know what we need? We need not a love triangle. We need a love fucking square.
Love square. Yeah, right. Because Tifa and Aerith was just too much already. We were not enough, right? We need more. We need an extra third character. Yeah. I'm sure when Yuffie shows up, she'll be in there too somehow.
Yeah.
Right.
Someone has to hold the legs while Tifa and.
Oh gosh, let's not get into that. Nope. It's like this. All right, so so Wedge is way goofier. I think he was already kind of goofy in the original game, but he's goofier.
Yeah, he was goofy. I think it was I'd say Wedge is kind of it's not a big change of what he was in the original. Yeah. But altogether, all three of them really didn't have anything going for them personality-wise. Right.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they were like one-note characters because like
correct.
You can't really. I mean, I guess you could have made them more fleshed out as a character, but then like it's weird, right? Where they chose to spend their padding because they could have talked about that for a while, but instead they decided to throw a bunch of side quests in the game.
Oh well, yeah, yeah. The side quest they have like two major segments where they just dump side quests on you.
Yeah, well, it's three really, right? Like you get the.
Oh yes, okay, yeah, you're right. The early section, the middle section, and then like right before you go to Shinra.
Right, and each one for the progressive you get 3, and then you get 6, and then you get like 9. You're like, here's half the side quests in the game. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. That's where they. I'd say the side quests are where they phoned it in.
I think that was a sacrifice in the altar of engagement, capital E engagement, which is a big term in industry game. Just for you listener, like I worked a little bit in video games, and like this is something that designers talk about a lot, and that they say that they can show you that there is a direct correlation with how much time a player spends in the game and how much money they end up spending in the game. and whether or not they're likely to buy the next game.
Yes, that is so true. Actually, a lot of players do correlate the worth with how much time they actually put into the product.
Absolutely, and it's something that it's a thing that once you're aware that engagement exists and that it's something that producers are forcing upon designers to slot into games, and some designers are like, hey, engagement's a good thing. They're like in the Kool-Aid, right? But it'll change your perception of games. Like if you go back to play like Far Cry, any of the Far Cry titles after 3, and you're just like, why is this section so long? And your answer's engagement. Why is this random bullshit that I have to do in the game? Well, it's because engagement. And so it's this just bloat. It's this bloat that it infects every AAA game, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the bloat in Final Fantasy VII, they really push that fat into key segments.
Yeah, for sure. And it's super weird that they chose to spend it more on combat and mechanical stuff rather than the story, because the story could they added lots more, and they could have used even more than that, because it was like
yes, they certainly could have.
Yeah, like I feel like that like 20% of the dialogue in the game is literally just telling the player that it's okay to keep going, or this is what you need to be doing next, and it is actually completely fourth wall breaking. Instead, they could have done that and then also inform the characters about like what their motivations and what they're going and what they're doing.
Yes,
because like arguably Tifa is like barely more of a character than Jesse, Biggs, or Wedge, bringing it back to those three.
Yeah. I mean, she has more dialogue.
Oh, yeah, by a lot. But
yeah,
but
for sure.
She doesn't say a lot at times. It's kind of weird. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, so Biggs, we got to finish up on him. So like Biggs, I think I just like what they did. I think he's fine. I think he's just being the kind of weird tough guy that is weirdly ineffectual, and he kind of is self-aware of the fact that he's capable, but not as nearly as capable as the people around him. It's like it's great, actually.
Yeah, well, yeah, he's like super obsessed with them being prepared,
right,
and avoiding risk.
Yeah, right. Which is great. That's cool.
Yeah,
somebody's got to say that.
For sure. Yeah, I think Biggs and Jesse, I think, got the most characterization pumped into them. Mm-hmm. For good or for ill, will probably vary player to player.
Yeah.
I like you said, like I have some mixed feelings on like Jesse, but like overall, like her having a personality is a boon.
Yeah.
Certain aspects of the personality, are whether or not they're problematic. Her being a big flirt that latches on the Cloud, mm-hmm. I could have done without, but the whole segment with her parents, namely her father, I think that was a little neat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's cool, and you get to feel like, I don't know, it puts a lot more weight on the early parts of the game.
Yeah, and why she's there.
Yeah, right. Why she's there and her motivations, and maybe player, you should be thinking about some of these things too, and
right.
Yeah, which it's just like you get a lot of free time to think about those things while you're walking through tunnels underground.
Oh yeah. Oh god. Yeah. Another thing with like Jesse is because since she is the demolitions, she mm-hmm. built the bomb for the Mako reactor, and it exploded. The explosion was out of her projections, and it resulted in a lot more damage and death than she anticipated. And they kind of hang on that fact that this is kind of haunting her.
Yeah, right. She's really concerned about what the damage she's doing, and yet she knows that she needs to still do it.
Right. Yeah. It's a necessary evil. All right. And speaking of necessary evil, one of the changes that I really do like from the original is that they made Avalanche a genuine organization.
Oh yeah. No, that's definitely a big change, and I appreciate that, because it actually means that like Shinra could probably just actually crush 3 people, right?
Right. Well, yeah, and what's even great is that Barrett, Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse, they're a splinter from the original Avalanche because Avalanche views them as being they're like too much.
Yeah, too extreme.
Yeah, too extreme.
Yeah. Which is great. No, that's great. I love it. And in fact, the fact that they're in there just enough is also good, because like they kind of, if you tried to flesh out that organization any more than them just being present, I think they would start going off into this weird tangent situation of like every time something happens, you're like, why didn't the others get involved? You know?
Yes. Yeah, they flesh it out as much as they needed to, considering the part Avalanche plays in the story. I think them just existing and them getting kind of like torn apart is fine. You know, that's the role they have to play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I dig it, and I also dig that the Shinra employee on the train got a little more characterization, because like he's actually maybe kind of good for the story. He's more relevant than you might think, because like he really backs up the concept that human beings do in fact work for Shinra.
Yes, they're not all mustache twirling villains as much as they're the board may paint them to be.
Yeah, and I think the original game didn't really make those characters sympathetic whatsoever.
No, the original game didn't really attempt to humanize the Shinra, minus one member.
Right, yeah, for sure. And so ends part 1 of our 4-part podcast on the Final Fantasy VII Remake. If you wish to continue, please insert part 2 now. Thanks again to Trent for helping me make this podcast possible, as well as special thanks to ocremix.org and their contributors LuIzA for their track Materia Junkie, and Kevin Lau for their track Aeris Lives.